Completely Booked, the official podcast of the Jacksonville Public Library. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Gabby. On today's podcast, we chat with Juan-Carlos Villatoro. He's a Navy veteran and entrepreneur who spearheaded a variety of startups and programs focused on environmental sustainability and challenging the way we recycle and process old materials. Juan-Carlos breaks down some pretty complex projects he's been a part of and tells us what he's currently working on in his quest to change the industry for the better. If you feel inspired by the end of this interview with Juan-Carlos, the library has tons of resources to help you learn more about how to mitigate environmental issues like pollution and climate change.
And if you find yourself interested in the topics covered in this podcast, I highly urge you to pop into the main library and check out our newest Makerspace art exhibit. It is called Reclaimed: Life Beyond the Landfill. All of the pieces in the gallery highlight recycling awareness and are green sculptures. Most of the materials used for the art pieces are reclaimed, recycled, or scavenged items that were definitely destined for the landfill before becoming a work of art.
So without further ado, here is our conversation with Juan-Carlos. Juan-Carlos, thank you so much for joining us today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got started working with all of the different projects you've been a part of?
I would have to say it was right after the Navy. I ended up in Jacksonville, Florida, thanks to the Navy. They promised me that I would be able to travel the world, and I did. I got to experience a lot of different cultures and meet different people, and most importantly, be able to understand myself when I was out at sea. And when I was out at sea, I noticed that besides the beautiful sunrises and sunsets that you can get to appreciate during the times on watch, I noticed that plastic was just floating everywhere. And I wanted to know, why is plastic floating everywhere? So that got me curious, and I started reading. And the little time that we had internet access, I would read the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, try to understand what's happening. And I realized that plastic doesn't really have much financial value. And that's why it was floating out in the ocean. So I set out, how can we assess some sort of financial value, or how can plastic be managed properly? And that took me down this rabbit hole of exploring. And next thing you know, I went out of the Navy so I can go back to school and become an engineer, hoping that as an engineer, I'd be able to find the solutions that could go into the marketplace, and then somehow we clean up the oceans. This is back in 2006. And that's when my adventure at the University of North Florida started.
And tell us a little bit about the project that you were involved with while you were at UNF.
Well, the project was more or less my degree. I remember one day going to the president's office. At the time, it was John Delaney, and asking him for help. And I said, listen, I'm here to get an education, but I find that the track as an engineer doesn't really get me to where I need to be. I want to start a company. I want to start a company that's financially sustainable, but at the same time, a company that changes the way we do business when it comes to recycling. Because I see that there's a lot of talk about recycling and let's protect the earth, but when you look down how those companies operate, they're not really doing that. So President Delaney, he thought I was a little crazy, but gave me the opportunity and assigned me to his second in command, which its title is a Chief of Staff. His name is Tom Sawarka. Dr. Sawarka gave me the opportunity. He served as a mentor and pretty much helped me navigate through the academic route that I was pursuing, even though I was warned from the very beginning that I was very likely to get the education I was seeking, but it was not going to add up to a degree. And I was okay with that because I knew I was going to hire myself. There was no resume to submit. It was a big gamble. I didn't know if it was going to work or not, but I went for it. And looking back, the best thing I ever did.
So tell us a little bit about the courses you took at UNF, because I think that's a really interesting part that really shaped the way you build the philosophy behind your companies.
Sure. So when you look at the typical curriculum, each degree gets certified by some organization that says that you've taken enough courses to understand that subject. So if it's engineering and it gets specialized into electrical or mechanical, and then you follow those tracks. But for what I was trying to do, I needed to know, why is it that beautiful minds that work at big companies with big budgets are irresponsible when they design devices that are meant to last for 6 months or 18 months at most? For example, it's a laptop, a phone. Why is it that from a policy point of view, legislature allows this to happen? And then I realized, oh my God, it's a lot of lobbying. What's a lobbyist? So that took me down the course of political science and understanding what is ethics. And then I started to find the crossroads of ethics, engineering, and policy. And at the same time, my love for art. I love art. I think that it's necessary, and to think that you could be an engineer, a scientist, a computer scientist, a water treatment engineer, and not understand how art works, how unnatural resources function, I think it's reckless, because life doesn't happen in a gray form, whether it be binary or concrete and metal. If you're able to understand how they integrate or how you could integrate them, it's a field that's not explored lately. Is I find that lately students are getting trained just to take a test and score high on certain ACT or ACT if they want to go to graduate school, but many of them don't really understand what they're studying, or maybe some of them, I felt like they just didn't care. They just wanted to get an A, regardless of whether they learned the subject matter or not.
That's interesting. Can you tell us a little bit about your early childhood and where you grew up?
Sure. I was born in El Salvador, and my dad owned an aluminum foundry. So I did grow up in a place where recycling was part of life. So I saw massive trucks coming in and out, and how the workers at the foundry would take the metal and separate it and then melt it. And I was fascinated by fire and the heat. When you feel that heat, and as a child, being able to see all this was mesmerizing. Then somewhere at the age of 5, my mother takes me to New York City with my brother, my younger brother. And we grew up in New York City, and I went to a public school. My mother was a cleaning lady. She cleaned houses for a living. And after school, I would spend a lot of time in the library. Out of all places, I would spend a lot of time in the library, which it just didn't add up for how I would behave in school. I was suspended a lot during my elementary time. And I did really bad as far as tests taken. But for some reason, the sciences and mathematics were the topics where I felt safe, because I've always had issues writing. Reading, not so much, but writing has been my most challenging topic till this day. So going to the library was a place where I could just explore the books and go through different books and not have to buy them. But also it was a place where it was air conditioned and it was safe. And growing up in New York City, if you're in an apartment during the summer without an air conditioner, it is really hot. So it worked out for us, for my brother and I. And then my mom, whenever she was done with work, she would come and pick us up. If it was too late because the library closed, we would be in front of the library just playing. As kids of the age 7 to 10, 11, times were different. And at least in comparison to today, I see that a lot of parents, their kids can't be away from them more than 50 feet, and they're worried. When I was growing up, we would just walk the blocks in New York City, and jump fences in the parks, and I don't know, it's just that's my childhood, New York City kid.
It sounds like you were exposed to recycling at a very young age. When did you realize that it affected the planet?
I realized it affected the planet somewhere between the age of 12 to 13. I was back in El Salvador. In 1992, which I was 11, my mother sent us back from New York City to El Salvador because she just had a very difficult time putting up with my brother and I, who were just very hyperactive kids. And she decided that my father would probably have a better opportunity to try to like give us some discipline. I don't think that worked out too well, but nevertheless, I remember one day they were melting aluminum, and I asked my father, why do you make such big black clouds of smoke when you melt aluminum? And he said, don't worry about it. That's how you're fed. And I said, but it matters. Look at all that black cloud. Look at the clouds up there. They're white. Why are yours black? And I would have to say that was my triggering point. Why were the black clouds coming from my dad's aluminum foundry black?
Greetings, listeners. Just to let you know, the library offers hundreds of programs every week at each of our 21 locations. Coming up, we are having a tech fair at the main library on Saturday, July 20th from 10 to 2 p.m. Come hang out with us on the anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon landing to celebrate 50 years of that happening. There will be a virtual reality station, a life-size programmable R2-D2 robot, green screen antics, 3D printing activities, robot races, and more. You'll also have the opportunity to learn about coding, robotics, and 3D design, all in our makerspace. So mark your calendars for Saturday, July 20th, and check our Tech Fair event page on Facebook for more information. Now back to the podcast.
What kind of projects do you work on to help kids sort of have that same experience you did growing up?
So one of the projects that we did during my time at UNF, we actually we built a computer lab, all recycled electronics and desks inside a shipping container. The shipping container was getting retrofitted by the construction management curriculum, and put together a bunch of friends that they all studied something else. I mean, we had two ladies from journalism. We had this guy named John Gonzalez doing electrical engineering for the solar panels. We had some people in business. All in, we were somewhere around 23 students building a computer lab with no budget from anywhere except just our goodwill and being resourceful. So that got me to understand how the students at a time where they were just taught to learn some theory, they were putting into practice. So that's one of those projects. It grew significantly. We actually ended up installing the computer lab in the Dominican Republic, and a local organization here in Jacksonville picked it up, and they actually raised somewhere around like $90 million from the World Bank, and they installed 243 schools in Haiti, Guyana, and there was another portion that went into the Virgin Islands in St. Thomas. So, over the years, it was fascinating to see how one project that was really just designed to bring pens and pencils for kids in the Dominican Republic grew to somewhere to over 200 plus schools in the Caribbean. And it was just an idea. And then once I was actually working in this company that also UNF helped me start Urban Mining, I started focusing on how can we get kids at an early age to learn about what's happening with the fourth industrial revolution. Is it possible for a kid to learn at third grade in elementary or middle school or going into high school that we are in a very fascinating time in human history where if you're a teenager, it's very likely you understand social media better than Congress. It's possible that if you're a high school student, you might be able to plug into 3D printing and start figuring out how to print a hamburger. It may sound crazy, but that's happening. I mean, not too long ago, this month, There was a company that went public and it raised billions of dollars, was just making burgers out of veggies. Who would have thought? In my time, I've also seen students print metals, the metals that are coming from virgin ore, but that's where I come in. And I'm like, hey, what if instead of throwing away your cell phone, we actually reprinted that cell phone into the latest version? That took me down to work with this school called Grasp Academy. And this is during the time when Superintendent Nikolai Vitti was around. So he supported the idea. I worked with Rachel Vitti, which is his wife, and also she started the school for kids with dyslexia. And it took me down to my foundation because I have dyslexia. So I wanted to know, I wanted these kids at Grasp Academy to understand that, hey, if you have dyslexia, it doesn't mean you're stupid. If that's what you've been told, you should learn different. Grasp is a place that is safe for you to learn and practice the arts or any of the STEM fields. And here's a lab where you can walk around using augmented reality and see how a sunflower might grow, or how important is water. I'll tell you a story of what happened a few years ago at Grasp. There was a hurricane coming our way. And you saw in the news that people were panicking because there was no water bottles. And I said to these kids, do you think this is right? Why are people panicking? We're about to get millions and millions of gallons of water. Shouldn't be the easiest thing to not worry about? And then the kids were saying, yes, that's true. Why are we worrying? And I said, maybe because they don't know how to filter it. Maybe they don't know how to treat it. What if you learn how to treat it and you go back home and you teach your parents not to freak out? Because there's a lot of water. So those were the things that we were working out in a very informal way in this lab. And it was basically a live classroom. And it caught the attention of the person in charge of southeast of the country for Tesla Motors. And he came down and spoke to the kids on one of those Wednesdays we met once a week. And the gentleman was fascinated by the program so much that he asked, can I bring my 2 kids? And I said, sure, bring them along. So he had his 2 kids, and the kids learned about, I think that day we were talking about pH. So the pH in water. I hope this is a long answer for your question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And why don't you tell us a little bit about the latest project you've been working on?
So Alchemista, the origin of the name of Alchemista, it's from my favorite book that was written by Paulo Coelho. And it's a Spanish book that's been translated to several languages. In English, it would be called The Alchemist. And I love that book because The Alchemist was, in a short form, I can tell you, was basically following your dreams, believing in yourself. And along the way, there are signs and people that appear in our lives, whether it be your mother or your friend, or it could be a cow, it could be a sheep, it could be water. And if you pay attention to those signs that the universe shows you, they tend to route you in the direction that you wish to go. Hopefully that direction you wish to go is one that long-term or short-term is beneficial for you and hopefully beneficial for others. And that's why I love The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. And then the new company called Alchemista, that's where the name comes from. So Alchemista is focused on, if we extract metals and focused on precious metals like gold, silver, palladium, how can we extract those metals without having to contaminate water? How can we save energy to make those metals? And at Alchemista, what we're doing is we're taking those metals that have already been mined from all around the world and giving them a new form without having to put in all the energy required to make metal. Here's how this works. So it doesn't make sense to me to recycle some type of metal, right? And let's say that metal, those metals are mixed. So you have, I'll give you an easy example, copper, aluminum, and gold. So why should you separate copper to 99.9% purity? Why should you separate aluminum to that purity as well and gold only to later on mix it again? All those steps require money to do and requires lots of energy. Right now with technology, mainly machine learning, artificial intelligence, we can look at those metals and figure out what can we use it in the form that it's placed on right now. So instead of having to melt and put all this energy, we can basically make it into a powder that does require some energy, yes, but it's much less than if you have to separate all those three. So you make those powders and then you put it into a 3D printer. And the 3D printing does the printing in the file that you send in. So that's what we're doing at Alchemista. So, one easy example that we decided to focus on, because you could basically print the majority of metals you see today, whether it be your phone or an engine on an airplane, it's really broad. So we decided to actually start printing catalytic converters, and they go on cars. And what a catalytic converter does, it basically helps burn the fuel that was not burned by your engine. And it puts out CO2 into the air and not unburned fuels. So that's what Alchemista is doing today. So we're actually a technology company that recycles.
That's really interesting.
Do you have any book recommendations for anybody that would want to get into this realm of knowledge?
Well, the first book will be The Alchemist.
Obviously.
Yes. It's a short read. I think that if you are a fast reader, you could get through it in probably like 4 hours. But if you have issues like me reading, there's an audiobook. And audiobooks are fascinating. So that's how I read my books.
What would you tell kids today who struggle succeeding and following the conventional education system? Like yourself, you pretty much made up your own route in college, and it kind of sounds like in elementary school and high school too.
Yes.
You marched to the beat of your own drum.
It's been painful. In the education field for me, I didn't really fall in between the lines between the professors and teachers. They either like me or they hate me. There was no in between. Because I rebelled about what they were trying to teach. And in the end, they weren't even getting to that. So my message to a student that is having a difficult time getting teachers to understand what he or she's trying to do is to have a seat, be respectful to your teachers, but realize that a test score doesn't define you. Getting 100% on a test doesn't mean you know the subject matter, but also getting a 65% doesn't mean you don't understand it, or maybe you got maybe you got a 0. That's the route I took. And long story, after several years of being in school and actually in business, not once has anyone ever asked me what was my GPA. But I do get constantly asked, so what do you know about this subject matter? So in the end, does a grade matter if you understand what you're trying to work on? I always knew I was going to work in metals. I love metals. So for me, metal is not driven by how much it's worth, but how they look, what cool things you could do with it, and how we can change the way we produce the metals without having to spend so much energy and money like we do today. And being in the fourth industrial revolution now, I'll challenge any of the kids that are struggling now to figure out a way how to make education better. Because right now we're going to be at a point that education is going to be redefined as well, just like most of the industries.
And why do you think it's so important to have programs that get kids enthusiastic about STEM subjects early on?
Getting kids to understand STEM, I would even add, STEAM, not just STEM. To be able to understand how the sciences in the natural world and aesthetically pleasing devices can change a life, it's powerful. I think that students should not be trained to just pass a test and spend the entire year just going through the motions of test taking, but rather, how does a screwdriver function? Why does it function? What does it hold? Does it look beautiful or not? What materials are made out of? And you can't get that exposure anywhere else than at an early age where it's really going to make a difference. There's research to show that kids in seventh grade, 6th to 7th grade, tend to make the choice more likely of where they're going to work as a career. So if you get there at an early age, I think being exposed to STEM is very important. I was exposed to my family. I was also exposed to my curiosity. And I grew up in New York City where aesthetics, arts are just everywhere. I was fortunate to be in that part of the world during my childhood.
Yeah, I think it's definitely very apparent that your childhood has shaped who you are now. And so I'm just wondering what somebody in your position, what your typical day-to-day is like. I mean, are you 9 to 5 or is it all day? And then, do you get vacation?
Yes to all the above. I am definitely not 9 to 5. I start my day somewhere around 4 a.m. and I respond to emails. I love coffee, so I drink coffee, and I enjoy my time alone. I love solitude because that's the time I get to have a conversation with myself, and I do that with a cup of coffee. If I'm in my house in Gainesville, I sit in front of a pool in my house that I converted into a pond, and I see the fish swimming all around and frogs. And at that time, it's still dark, so I hear the owls. So it's very important for me to find the quiet time, and then I'll go into work, which is the refinery here, where I'll melt some metals or we'll prepare material for some 3D printing, which will be somewhere done at a different lab. And once time is said and done, it's probably like 8 in the afternoon, and I'll sip on some wine and continue working. I have a 2-year-old baby that I enjoy spending time with, and it's very important for me to spend time with her so she understands that her father loves her, but at the same time, that what we're doing today is very likely important for her. So I work every single day. That's probably one of the problems I have at home. And just, it's very difficult to find a partner that is willing to put up with that missing time from you, or to be able to see you physically, but mentally you're somewhere else. I've been fortunate in that sense to have a partner that is willing to take this journey with me.
Yeah. She shares your love for precious metals.
Yeah, probably more on the precious metal side. Yes, she likes gold a lot.
Yeah.
She likes
Diamonds.
gold for, I don't know about the diamonds, but she definitely likes the gold. I don't know if it's just for the value, but I think she appreciates art and the aesthetics of it. But that's how my day is. I work every single day, but I don't even feel it or see it as work. I love to work. And you asked me about vacation. I take vacation whenever I want. I have my responsibilities, and sometimes I'll leave for a whole month and I'll just travel to Cuba on my own and backpack and live in the mountains, or I'll go with my partner. Asha will go to Italy, or we'll go to Cuba and rent a car and just drive. So traveling is very important as an engineer, as a business person, because you get to see how things are defined and in different parts of the world and how the climate interacts. So I work every day. I love it.
Sounds like a good life.
I think so too.
Well, what's next for you?
What's next for me? What I've embarked right now is extremely challenging. What's next for me is, let's say, it's something that I've been working for years now, and I still have not been able to make any contribution. I want to find a solution for plastic. I want to find a way to assess plastic of value that people all around the world start to actually mine it from wherever it's floating or from wherever it's just drifting out in the open air, and take it somewhere so it's processed properly and responsibly. And that's what's next for me. I've been stuck in this next plastic solution for, I don't know, going on 15 years.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like it's more than a one-man job. So if there were other people out there interested in the same thing, how would they get in contact with you to brainstorm and meet and figure out a solution to this huge problem that affects everybody, probably more than they realize it?
Yes. So let me hit a note on the last part that you said. Plastic impacts us a lot more than we think. So here's an example, okay? When you look at plastics, it breaks down after certain times. There are recent studies that have appeared that plastic has broken down to such a small particle sizes that they have found it in the digestive system. So if you don't understand what that means, inside the stomach of an oyster. So imagine how small would that have to be. I love oysters.
Me too.
As a matter of fact, I was having some yesterday, and I was thinking about this. Is it possible that the plastic inside the oysters that I'm eating ends up flowing in my bloodstream? Is it possible that plastic could cause a blood clot? Can it mess up my liver, my kidneys? So plastics, we have yet to see the damage that they're going to cause, but I feel extremely optimistic that a lot of minds around the world are plugging into finding a solution for plastic. And I think it's near. The solution is near.
And I think, too, we are reaching tipping points from where there will be no return. People are starting to become more conscious and aware of that. And I think pioneers like you who make the philosophy of their companies to be sustainable, to somehow also be financially sufficient, but not have horrible impacts on the world. You know, hearing stories like yours and seeing the model of a company like yours definitely inspires, you know, the next generation of innovators and thinkers and people who want to start their own companies. So,
you know, I think that if we start designing companies that are not driven by every 3 months, the quarterly profits, that's one of the things that needs to be changed from how do you give a CEO the opportunity to grow a company that's here for the long term, not just for the next 3 months. And if you look at the companies that do that, they've been here for a very long time. And I think there's going to be much more of that. I'm a big fan of Tesla and Elon Musk. I don't necessarily agree with him and his plans to go to Mars because this planet is doomed. I actually disagree with that. I think this planet is a planet that we know we can survive. And it is possible to get the damage we've done back into a form where it could be restored.
Well, thank you so much, Juan-Carlos, for joining us today. I think your story is super fascinating. And if you do want to learn more about plastic consumption, we have a lot of programs at the library this summer as well. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for your time.
All right, guys, we hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please be sure to rate and review Completely Booked on whatever app you stream your podcast from.
Last week, we asked our listeners what their favorite creative medium was, and we have to give a shout out to our artists at the Makerspace Gallery. For example, there's a sculpture called Midden Woman, and it's by Donald Gialinella, and I hope I'm saying that right. But it's made of a cluster of old plastic toys, utensils, electronic game components, and a myriad of other mass-produced plastic objects.
You can also come see Oscar the Octopus and Flo the Flamingo, these incredible life-size sculptures by Clifford Buckley. And he actually used lottery tickets folded into paper triangles to make these, and it's really just amazing.
Yeah, it's definitely worth checking out. You can bring in the family for summer learning and check out the gallery. It's really unlike anything I've ever seen before, and my 5-year-old was completely blown away. Also, Juan-Carlos mentioned The Alchemist in his interview. You can definitely find that book here at Jacksonville Library or on Hoopla. It's a very popular book, and it's on a lot of summer reading lists.
Thank you guys so much for joining us again, and until next week, I'm Gabby.
And I'm Amanda.